Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which finally sees the release of Avatar 2, Avatar: The Way of Water, which is getting a myriad of reactions, which mostly all speak the same tune, which is that, hey, it's very pretty to look at, but the story is downright simple, secondary, worse than the first one, slightly better than the first one. I mean, you name it, those are pretty much the general consensus that is being said about this movie, which is apparently also, just like the first film, obsessed with some type of environmental messaging. But I will let you, as you go see the film, determine that for yourselves and whether or not that is important or not. I'm just simply here to talk about the box office numbers and whether I think that they are on point, whether I think that they are realistic, and what that means for the future of the film going forward. Of course, I won't have any exact measurements or exact predictions until the second weekend drop-off, as that is typically when we're able to get a pretty good idea about how a film will do in the long term. We will also today talk about the news that Henry Cavill has apparently been confirmed to be exiting the role of Superman after just having been pushed and promoted in the Black Adam release in the extra credits scene of that film. One of the only reasons I think the film even made as much money as it did, still being a box office flop, despite what Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson says. And yeah, apparently all of that was for naught, and all of it was to lead to him being told, hey, guess what? We don't need you anymore. All of this, of course, in the midst of him leaving the Witcher series. Something, of course, makes me wonder, was he leaving the Witcher series to dedicate more time to the role of Superman? And if that was the case, did he just get completely screwed over by James Gunn? It is hard to say at this time. But before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, live the fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. Always hard to get through that intro. But as you can see, the domestic opening range for Avatar 2, starting off with the box office, is $145 to $179 million. This is, of course, pretty much on pace for what has been already said, has already been projected by Deadline.com. Deadline and other so-called industry experts have said they expect the film to make north of $500 million in its opening weekend, though, of course, good old Nancy at Deadline is now kind of changing that a little bit by talking about the fact that the rollout has had strong early numbers, but China COVID apparently is having an impact that is making them rethink some things. For one, it says there that it's reporting in Korea it opened to 3.24 million, including Midnight's with an 85% market share, lower than comparable markets, comparable times, etc., with Spider-Man No Way Home and Avengers Infinity War, which also debuted on a Wednesday. However, as we previously noted, the 3-hour-plus runtime makes this appointment viewing for some. Today was a workday in the market. The average score is 9.48, which is above both of the comps cited above. So it's doing less than those other two films, but it's overall doing better in certain regards. Now, the interesting news here is in China, The Way of Water has been planned for 3,000 showings at 7 p.m. local, but ended up doing only 1,688. This is a result of the ongoing COVID issues in the market, where 73% of cinemas are open, and there is a confidence issue amid the about face from the government. Yes, I would probably agree with that because, yes, it is pretty much an about face by the government just in time for the release of this film. As I mentioned in previous videos, it's almost as if the Chinese government said, we're the CCP. We have a lot of money that we can make from this. Let's go ahead and reduce all of our restrictions to make that extra bit of money. Almost as if all of the restrictions that we've been putting in place have really not been for health, but have been more about having control. But hey, we have a chance to make money? Oh, let's go ahead and do that. Now, of course, that's speculation on my part, but it is kind of interesting that you have a film being released at the same exact time, or rather, a film that's being released is now all of a sudden having the impact on federal government, on the government within, on the Communist Party within China to change their rules, right? They had recently been hardening down, locking down once again, pushing these things. We were also seeing some protests from the people there saying, this is getting ridiculous. Like, what the hell are you doing? And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, we have a movie coming out that we could actually make millions from. Let's go ahead and reduce some of those restrictions. Remember also that the technology being used in Avatar actually was developed by China. So a major part of this film, as far as the technology aspect, was developed by China, so they have a lot of money at stake in this film. Not only because they get 75% of the box office receipts in this country, but also because they're probably getting some type of cutback, some type of money from the technology that's being used in the actual movie. So as you can see, China, they were projecting to be $100 million in China this opening weekend. They're now taking a much more cautious stance. So it'll be interesting to see where that number finally ends up. Either way, though, the movie is still projected to make quite a bit of money. Domestically, the range is expected to be, according to Box Office Pro, $145 to $179 million domestically, with a total domestic range of somewhere between $574 and $803 million, with a pinpoint forecast of $665 million. So they're expecting this film to make at least $500 million plus at the box office for this weekend, or not just for this weekend, but for the entirety of its run. And if a domestic total is coming in around $500 million, the chances of $1 billion becomes that much more likely. And as I said, Deadline and others are projecting it to make $500 plus million in its opening weekend. If that actually holds, if that does take place, now, of course, with China now being a question mark, because I think that $100 million of that was going to be expected to come from China. If only 50 to 75 million comes from China instead, maybe the film only makes $450 to $500 million, maybe $400 to $500 million, depending on where it performs and how it performs in other markets. Some people have been mentioning things like the World Cup and the French being in the final and things like that, and I think that will have some impact in that country, but ultimately France, amongst others, are not really known for being the biggest of box office producers. Yes, you can still get a decent amount of money from those markets, but those will be made up over time as people start to go back to the theaters after the World Cup is over. So that's something that, again, will be caught up by by the end of next week, I would have to imagine. But it is interesting nonetheless to see that the domestic range has the film going up to $803 million, which, before you adjust for inflation, is actually higher than the amount of money that the first Avatar film actually made. And so, of course, I have some doubts about that, but we will have to wait and see. Looking at the actual box office projections for the weekend for this and other films, we see that, again, the average for the opening weekend they're expecting from Box Office Pro is $161 million. So that, of course, would be a very impressive number there. And as you all know, we always wait for the numbers to actually come in before making any type of predictions with any sense of confidence, because, again, we have to have numbers. We have to see what the tracking is. We have to see what the day-to-day drop-off is going to be, because if the film opens to $500 plus million worldwide, I suspect the film's going to have a massive drop-off week 2, because that's just the nature of big-budget films. They have massive openings, they have massive drop-offs weekend 2, and then depending on whether the film is good or not, whether it has good word of mouth or not, determines whether you see the film have consistent drop-offs in a very strong and positive light, or, again, much stronger drop-offs that we have seen in other films. Speaking of strong drop-offs, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever dropping now to the number 2 spot after 5 weeks. So it's going into its 6th week of release now, I believe. And this film is expected to drop a 59%, so bringing its domestic to $418.3 million. So this is the reason why I do suspect that $430 to $450 million is I think, guaranteed, and I think that overall $450 to $500 million domestic is most likely. The reason why is because, though we see this 60% drop this weekend, I think a lot of that is because of the opening weekend of Avatar: The Way of Water, and as we enter into the holiday season, where more people are off from work and off from school, I suspect that the weekly drop-offs will be a little bit less than this. And so it'll be interesting to see where this film tracks up against other films like Doctor Strange, etc. Again, where it's been tracking ahead about 5% or so. And if it keeps on at that number of 5%, then it's looking the domestic will end somewhere around 435 million. But I suspect, as I said before, don't sleep on the domestic totals for this movie, and don't sleep on the fact that there are some people that are going to go see this movie over the holiday season, as we saw them went over the Thanksgiving break to go see it, even though the word of mouth has not been that great with this movie, and the film is overall not that good. I think that it's still going to have an impact on it nonetheless. So I still think $450 to $500 million domestic is possible, though $435 to $450 is a bare minimum for this movie at this point in time. Violent Night expected to drop 48% in its 3rd week of release, but again, a film that is on the cusp of, if not already, having breaking even. Strange World, even though 34% drop is not the worst drop percentage-wise, because it had a very, very, very weak opening weekend, the film is still guaranteed to be a $200 plus million flop. The Menu continues to hang around. We'll wait and see if that's able to make up the $10 million in the red that it was as of last weekend. The Whale, a film that I'm actually looking forward to going to see, with Brendan Fraser in it, and a film from A24 is opening up in more screens. I'm not seeing it anywhere near me, unfortunately, but I'm excited to go see this film at some point just to see that performance from Brendan Fraser. Devotion, another $100 million flop from Sony. It'll be interesting to see exactly where this film ends up when all is said and done. Fabelmans continues to increase its release. Black Adam continues to hang around, even though that is a box office flop, no matter what The Rock says. And then we have this film, Empire of Light, which, Can't really say much more about it than that. But it is going to be interesting to see exactly where this film falls, especially with China now being a major wild card. Because again, you have the zero COVID policy, which seems to have been abandoned by China on a temporary basis, all to allow people to go see this film. But the fact that they were planning on 3,000 showings and only ended up doing about half of that definitely raises some doubts about how much money this film is going to be able to actually produce. I think that ultimately what we're going to have to look at is we're going to have to look and see, do the lockdowns, do they have a major impact on the movie-going population? Do we see more and more protests come from this? Because if China is willing to drop its lockdowns all for the sake of money and all for the sake of making a movie, will that finally be able to be the straw that breaks the camel's back and allow for the people of China to stand up finally to their government and do something about it? Because we all know how evil the CCP honestly is. We'll, of course, have to wait and see. I don't think that Way of Water and Avatar 2 is going to be the catalyst for that. But hey, revolutions have been, started on much lesser fare. But it is going to have an interesting impact on the overall box office because for the first Avatar film, China was a pretty major factor with well over $200 million coming from China alone for that first film. So the fact that, though, they were projecting a $100 million opening weekend in China, and now that's not going to be the case, makes you ask some questions, and the domestic numbers definitely point to this film being a strong opening. And as I've said previously, the $500 plus million opening weekend that they're projecting sounds about right to me. With the China news, I think $400 to $500 million sounds about right based off of the industry projections. We obviously know that those can come well underneath. Right, those can be well off, and the film can underperform. The film also can overperform. What I can tell you is that in my local theaters, the only showings that have any real sold seats are the 3D IMAX showings. If you go ahead and look to the 2D showings, you can check and see how we went over this on my live stream this past weekend on Tuesday. When it comes to the 2D showings, there were almost no seats sold. The 3D showings, a handful of seats sold. The only ones that had any real major seats sold were the IMAX showings, and so I think that says a couple of things. One, obviously those IMAX 3D showings cost a heck of a lot more, and so that is going to bring in a decent amount of money, but it also is going to bring the perception that a lot of people are going to see the movie, when in reality, it's just that because of the massive ticket prices, and because only the vast majority of people are going to see this in the major markets, and specifically in the high demand, highest ticket price films and highest ticket price versions of the film, with the IMAX 3D especially being, close to $20 depending on where you are in the market. Is going to have an overall impact on the film itself. I still think the film's going to make well over $1 billion. Again, my range is $1.5 to $2 billion by the end of its run. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think Avatar Way of Water, especially with these early projections coming out, do you think that it is going to get to $1.5 to $2 billion by the end of its run? Do you think it's realistic to say its domestic range is $574 to $800? I personally think that sounds about right, especially if they are projecting the film to open at $500 million, though. I imagine that probably will have to be adjusted with now what's going on in China. So let me know your thoughts about that. Also, what are your thoughts about the Henry Cavill situation? Of course, I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, but yeah, I think this is the dumbest move that you could really honestly make. And I think that the fact that they have James Gunn, some people have been excited for it, and I think some people are kind of blinded by James Gunn, to be perfectly honest, right? They look back to the first Guardians film, and that film was very good. But then you look to the second Guardians film, it wasn't very good. You then look to The Suicide Squad, and I know some people like it, but I thought the movie was complete and utter trash. And I look at a lot of the things that James Gunn has done, and some of them have been good, some of them have not been good. I don't really think he's necessarily the best person to be in charge of setting up this universe going forward. And the fact that one of his first moves is to say, oh yeah, by the way, you know that Henry Cavill thing? You know that thing that's probably the only reason why Black Adam made as much money as it did, because people wanted to see him back on the screen? In the screen I was in, opening night, going to see Black Adam, guess what happened? There was very little reaction throughout the entire film, but once that end credit sequence happened and Henry Cavill showed up on screen, mass eruption of applause for that happening. You have now taken away that excitement. You have now taken away one of the few things that people had to look forward to, one of the few good things from the modern era DCEU. You've taken that away, and now you're saying, oh, we're to make things better. While, of course, Ben Affleck apparently is in talks to helm a future DC pick. So you're going to keep Ben Affleck, but you're going to drop Henry Cavill? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So what are y'all's thoughts about that? I know Rivers ticked off about it as well, and I can totally understand why. But let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. If you like the video, smash that like button, like the fireman. Honestly, smash the rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. A shout out to Chris from the 80s. My hope is to have the December shoutouts video recorded sometime today. We'll, of course, wait and see whether or not that happens or not, as things in my life have always been thrown into my way to keep me from doing that. But thank you all very much for your time and attention. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Chris from the 80s. Check him out on YouTube. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my November Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illich. Thank you very much, Father. Garrett Searles, Jaimir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, The Modern Major General Story, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can check out on YouTube at his channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Rosetta Allen, who also has a YouTube channel that you can check out at Eagle Writer, and Miss Martin Muses, who also has a YouTube channel, Miss Martin Muses, and of course the amazing Empress of the Universe, Tina B, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Tina B, where she hosts the show with Stephanie B, one of my mods, and one of my Valkyrie, called Soup to Nuts. Check out Soup to Nuts, and it premieres pretty much every Friday. So again, shout out to all of my Patreon people, also to all my Subscribe Star people, starting off with Matt317. Check him out on Twitch at Matt317. The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And ZK-Man you could check out over at xtheboundaries.co to follow him as he starts his podcast, and also for many of his musical musings as well. Check him out. Very, very talented guy. And then lastly, my locals peeps. We got Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan. How about a hockey player? UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win. J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you all so very much for supporting me. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out the top link in the video description below, where you get access to that. Also, you get access to special things like giveaways, and also exclusive podcasts that I do with John the Flickinger and other guests throughout the month of November and in the previous and the months to follow as well. And again, if any of that sounds interesting to you, especially the 4K giveaways, Steelbook giveaways, some of them that I have to give away this month are films like Starship Troopers on 4K Steelbook, Top Gun Maverick on 4K Steelbook, amongst many others. If that sounds interesting to you, check out the link and follow the instructions down below. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.